So, let's remember what this thing is about. So RoundPix is an online service that creates virtual tours on behalf of real estate agents and their clients. A screenshot. There's always typo anyway. A screenshot. Yeah, did you just spot it? You didn't spot it? You were too busy stressing about what's the HSC keyword. I don't know. Quick, let's try and come up with as many answers as we can. A screenshot of a final virtual tour webpage is shown below. Here you go. This is a real service, by the way. You can go look up these guys. You can find this stuff and you can pan around and have a look. Okay, now it starts to talk a little bit about this, which we're going to refer back to. But the question, at least the first one is, explain how advances in processing and in communications technology for end users have enabled such a service to gain mainstream status. Okay, very quickly. Two things. Number one, this question was pretty well done. Okay, and I think that's partly because there were not that many marks on it, which means you could get away with not having a huge amount of detail on there. But also because you got asked a very, very similar question to this before. And I was testing to see, okay, how should you pay attention and learn your lesson from the other one, which was done quite disastrously. I think it was about Siri and Google Now. And the phrasing is very similar because in the HSC, you get questions like this. Okay, you're like, oh yeah, I remember that question now. Anyway, so we did do pretty okay on it, but let me just rehearse it for you because that's what this time is for. We want to revise as much as possible so when you get to the actual HSC, you'll nail it, okay? So, 2 marks because there's 2 parts to it, right? Explain how advances in number 1, processing, and number 2, communications technology, have allowed the service to gain popularity. Well, let's have a look at what the service is, right? So you remember the basic way that it works. They take a whole bunch of pictures and then they stitch them together in a special proprietary software way, which allows you to then move around as if it was just one picture in a 3D space. Okay, so let's think about number 1. I'll leave this for a second. The processing needs required for this. Okay, so processing is immediately you ought to think, okay, the CPU, that's the main thing that does processing, right? Well, what kinds of advances, that was the question, wasn't it? What kinds of advances in CPUs make this service possible? Why might this service not have been possible, say, 5 to 10 years ago? Or at least not as good, okay? So the common answers, and this is basically what I was looking for, right? Is that there's a lot of graphics intensive, and if you're looking for sort of like the right language to use, okay, this is the way I would say it, this is the terminology I would use. There's a lot of graphics intensive tasks involved in turning a bunch of still images, which are flat, okay, just a matrix of pixels, okay, into something which is spherical and which you can pan around and have it be a kind of seamless experience, right? So, being that this is a graphics intensive task, number 1, stitching the images together. And then number 2, your computer at home having to interpret that stitched together version of the picture. And end users' computers. You really actually need quite a lot of power underneath your computer to be able to do this kind of thing. We kind of take it for granted because our phones can all do this now and our iPod touches, and it's very, very simple. It's very, very small and compact. But these are, this is the point, right? These are advances in processing technology that are fairly recent, okay? All right, again, advances in communications technology. So, and you could have done this in this way. You could have had like a little subheading. Okay, you can help me out with this one. It's a pretty obvious one, right? What advances in communications technology were needed to make this technology possible? What do you reckon, Ricky? Okay, let's take that answer and let's think about how many marks would you give it if you saw that word as a sentence for the second sort of like part of this answer? How many marks would you give it? I'd give it a big fat 0 out of 1. Now, it's a good place to start, though, so can we build on it a little bit? What about the internet? What's been the advance? Because the internet is old. It's very old, right? But, so what's been the advance that's allowed this to enable this?
Faster speed.
Okay, good, right? So, faster speeds. So, let's see. Faster speeds for accessing the internet. Okay, that's number one. Any other sort of thoughts?
Increased prevalence and
Yeah, good. So not just do we get faster internet, but we get internet in more places. Okay, so you can say, this is our first little subpoint. You can say widespread access. Okay, so you can access these kinds of things from your phone, and that's really easy and cheap as well. Okay. Now, it's also worth mentioning, these two fit together. Even though you might not have mentioned it in a question that was only worth 2 marks, if there were a few more marks, what else might you say? Can you see there's an important relationship between the communication system and the processing system and how they advance together? Okay, because the more processing power you've got, the more compressed you can make files, right? Which means they're smaller, and that means you can send more of them through your communications network. Okay, so if you had more marks to play with here, and you need to provide more detail on your answer, that might be a direction that you go in. You want to draw out the relationship between the two, because there's quite a close relationship between them. Okay.